What is needed for Brazilian cities to become more sustainable, smart, and inclusive? To discuss the mobilization of resources and stakeholders and players aiming to overcome this challenge, we invite Barbara Buchner, Director General of the Climate Policy Initiative, Elkin Velasquez, Regional Representative from Latin America and Caribbean from ONU Habitat, Gilberto Perre, the Executive Secretary of the National Front of Mayors, Leany Lemos, Director of Operations of BRDE, Henrique, Manager of Urban Development of World Resources Institute, and our moderator, the Project Manager of GIZ Brazil, Gustavo Ribeiro. I'd like to call to the stage the authorities that will participate with us so that we can start panel number 7. Your participation is also very welcome. We have our chat, so any comments you might have about the issue, or if you have any questions, please use the chat on the YouTube channel. Our moderator, Gustavo Ribeiro, has the floor. Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here with ABDE in such an important event, and I have here with me live Leany Lemo, and also participating remotely we have Mr. Velasquez from ONU Habitat and Henrique Evans, Gilberto Perre, and Barbara Buchner. So it's my great pleasure to have you all here. I work in the GIZ cooperation project that cooperates with a lot of institutes here, and we are among friends. It is my great pleasure to be here. We have different speakers who will discuss the challenge of urban development, which should be sustainable, aimed at the SDG 11, which aims to reach sustainable cities, or urban centers, and discuss the role of capital, national and international capital in funding to reach these objectives. So to open up the discussions, I would like to invite Elkin Velasquez. We have a very busy panel, so I will keep track of the time. We have more or less 7 minutes to each of you, so I'll give the floor now to Elkin Velasquez from UN Habitat. Thank you, Gustavo. Good morning to all of you in Brazil. I would like to thank ABDE for the invitation made to UN Habitat to address you. Please forgive me, but I will speak in a mixture of Portuguese and Spanish. The UN, with the member states, local governments, and local communities, are all asking themselves, how can we accelerate the implementation of our sustainable development goals in the cities? To do so, in UN Habitat, we have a proposal which is a matter of method, considering what we have been doing so far. So we have a scenario in which we can get a lot of scale. We could have a lot more cities with big transformations in the communities and neighborhoods of our cities. So this is a matter of method. We need to work together more and more in several steps and processes of what we call the value chain of sustainable urbanization. So we have to connect in a very smart manner the data generation so that we can make evident the possibilities and opportunities of the states. So to place all of that in the appropriate plans that need to be developed in the cities. These plans should be coherent with the sustainability and inclusion perspective. And from there on, we can draw some conclusions in terms of priority projects. To this point, everything is going fine in the region of Latin America and Caribbean. The cities are more or less advancing in this process, but we still miss a connection between identifying the pipeline, the projects which are strategic and integrated, and connecting all of that to investment, to funding, and to financing of different projects. If you talk to colleagues in development banks and global development banks, regional development banks, even international ones, they will tell you that they have contact with a lot of good ideas, many projects, but well, well, well structured projects. That's a bit rare and a bit more difficult to see. So, UN partners in many cities of the world, they have been working to develop proposals. Uh, One of the proposals is cities investment facilities. So I have some slides. If you allow me, I will share my screen. Please let me know if you're seeing my slides. Can you see my screen? So this is what you can see. So cities investment facility, which takes all of the three previous steps: generation of good information, good urban planning, identification of the key projects that will have an impact in this planning, and then move forward with the process of having a good financial structuring and connecting the planning to good financial mechanisms. What we do have the money, but what we miss is what we're lacking is good and well structured projects. So this roadmap, I will not explain it thoroughly, but what I want to leave you with as a message, as a takeaway, is that there are a number of entities getting connected to work together in the different points of this process of building up a good uh, portfolio and pipeline of urban projects that are well structured and correspond to a good city planning. So many good that there's another point here. Many good projects are not connected to urban planning. So solicited proposals. There are many good proposals in the region, but they're not connected to the city planning. But and there are also planning that is not based on good evidence. Maybe the idea is very good, but not based being based in the evidence. It becomes a bit complicated. So this whole process, this value chain, is not very well adjusted and interconnected. So at the end, it will not work that smoothly for the public and private system and the funding systems that will help to develop all of the vehicles and mechanisms to provide scale to these projects in Latin America and Caribbean. Then would not be as effective. This is an effort that we have been undertaking. So first of all, for the city's investment facility to have a portal
to receive all these proposals from this process. Secondly, a space for advisory and monitoring and support to cities, projects, so that they can reach the phase of good structuring. This is the process we are at now with different vehicles of public and private investment. My last message is there's a very interesting moment because there is increasing interest abroad from investment sectors in investment with social impact. This social impact is something that the UN is able to measure through the SDGs, through the SDGs, right? The Sustainable Development Goals. So that closes the cycle that leads to certification for a project that follows this path. Not only that, it has guaranteed measurement and modeling of impact by UN experts. So that's the process. We are now in Latin America. We are taking this process, expanding the process in Latin America, and with the expectation of continuing to work with partner institutions in the country. I'd like to conclude now my presentation and tell you that the major goal we have in the next few years in the implementation of global agendas, the 2030, the new urban agenda, the Paris Agreement, there's the possibility of applying more method in a more strategic and systematic manner to scale up. If we don't scale up, we will continue talking, giving talks and discussions and so on, but without concrete results. We are very positive regarding spaces such as this one in order to continue advancing in the exchange of ideas and processes that are advancing. This is all very positive. Thank you once again to ABD for the invitation. Thank you, Elkin. Going back to the main points, Elkin Velasquez is regional representative for Latin America and Caribbean of UN Habitat, and so scaling up of projects in order to achieve the SDGs, especially the 11, and also some of the UN Habitat proposals with good projects able to receive proposals and demands from cities and structuring a cycle of preparation of projects. I'd like to thank you. We will resume this discussion later. I would like to give the floor now to Barbara Buchner, Global General Director of the Climate Policy Initiative. Barbara.
To be here today with you, and I apologize that I am speaking English, but I really look forward to discussing the importance of resilient and smart cities here with you. Yes, my name is Barbara Buchner. I'm the Global Managing Director of Climate Policy Initiative, and for over 10 years, my organization has helped governments, financial institutions, and businesses to drive economic growth while addressing climate change. And since 2019, CPI has held the Secretariat for the Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, which is allowing us to develop a greater focus on cities and the role of cities finance in this context. And just for those of you who are not familiar with the alliance, it serves as the multi-level and multi-stakeholder coalition aimed at closing the investment gap for urban and subnational climate projects and infrastructure worldwide. And all the work we do is really member-driven, and it really aims to support and enhance the great work that our members are already doing. And our members include more than 60 public and private financial institutions, development finance institutions, governments, international organizations, NGOs, research groups, and city networks that represent most of the world's largest city. Before we look at climate finance to cities more closely, I'd like to very quickly just set the scene for international climate finance flows. What we've seen in our latest work is that total climate finance has steadily increased over the last decade, reaching over $630 billion in 2019, 2020. But the growth of these flows has slowed in the last 2 years, and we are falling behind. In fact, an increase of almost 600% in annual climate finance is required to meet the internationally agreed climate objectives and sustainable development objectives that we just heard about by 2030 and avoid the most dangerous impacts of climate change. In terms of subnational finance, there's also a massive gap between the investment needed of the current and future urban infrastructure development and the actual investments. However, and I want to focus on that a little bit like my previous speaker, I want to focus on the point that the opportunity is here. What we see is that globally, low carbon resilient growth could deliver economic opportunities and benefits of $26 trillion from now until 2030, and that's a conservative estimate. So if this also heard just from my previous speaker that the money is there, but how can it be made accessible to cities? Well, I think leveraging external capital, such as private sector finance, is essential, as the need for investment in climate-friendly infrastructure is just far greater than what is available through the traditional public sources. But for that to happen, some improvements must be made, and let me mention 3 of them. First, because of national regulations, a lot of cities legally cannot have access to private funds. So for climate finance to reach cities, national governments must work with cities on solutions for how private finance can be most effectively used. Land value capture and public and private partnerships are good examples of this, but cities need more. Second, national and subnational fiscal and institutional frameworks must be refined to improve project bankability. I think the ability of municipalities to attract private finance will depend in part on the revenue sources to which they have access to cover financing costs. So improving those frameworks will help cities to improve their public source revenue, but also advance access to private investment. And third, improving the quality of city financial data and management systems is also essential to private investors. So in order to make investment decisions, investors need to be able to understand municipal accounts and balance sheets and have confidence in the overall quality of financial management systems. So in a more project-related scenario, the feasibility and the quality of projects in which private funds will be invested are also directly relevant. So a good option for cities here is to work with project preparation facilities, which are an important tool for assisting cities in solving this constraint. I'd like to highlight just some other ways in which the Alliance, but also CPI more broadly, are working to help close the subnational climate finance gap. And here again, I'm going to make 3 points. My first one is better transparency and information. As I've mentioned before, most cities, especially in emerging economies and developing countries, face challenges in identifying and developing financially viable low carbon, net zero carbon and climate resilient infrastructure projects, which are at the same time attractive to both public and private financiers. So the Alliance has created a project preparation resource directory, which is an online resource aimed to help subnational governments and stakeholders identify project preparation facilities that can support them in developing green and resilient infrastructure. And you can find that on the Alliance website. Second, it is about ambitious frameworks and accountability. And an example here is the Leadership for Urban Climate Investment, or LUCI framework initiative, which is a framework that elevates and tracks commitments made by the Alliance member initiatives. And each initiative mobilizes key stakeholders to build an effective and efficient framework that targets specific gaps along the value chain, linking initiatives that support projects from upstream concept to downstream finance, ready implementable infrastructure. And again, previous speakers had spoken to the importance of the value chain. And just one example here, the City Climate Finance Gap Fund, which is one of the central initiatives of LUCI, is the first global fund dedicated to supporting cities in the very early stages of project development, with an aim to unlock 4 billion euros of investment. And third, innovative business models and financing solutions that can scale private investments. We've, again, already heard about the need for a pipeline of well-structured projects. In the Alliance and in our Enabling Frameworks Action Group, we are working on how to enhance the role of national development banks to overcome key barriers the cities face in securing and allocating investment to low-carbon, climate-resilient infrastructure. And we believe that national development banks or subnational development banks are in a unique position to have extensive knowledge of the barriers and the opportunities to investment, and they're able to access many funding sources, from international markets to institutional investors, to official development assistance, to budget transfers from the governments, but also to intermediate development finance institutions and multilateral climate fund sources. And they're also in a key position to channel private sector investment. So we very much look forward to continuing to work on how we can enhance basically the role of these institutions in cities finance. And private investment, as I said before already, is critical if you want to get to the scale needed. So I'd like to highlight, as my last point, one example of how to come up with these innovative solutions that can attract private capital, and again, that can involve development finance institutions and national development banks more closely. So the one example I want to mention are incubators or accelerators, such as the Global Innovation Lab for Climate Finance, which we manage. And just in a nutshell, it's a public-private initiative of experts in sustainable investment from governments, development finance institutions, investment banks, institutional investors, and other private sector institutions. And the goal is to unlock private investment in low-carbon resilient development at scale. So it does that in a way to find, crowdsource, develop, and then support the launch of new solutions and specific projects that can help build the pipeline and launch basically concrete pilots on the ground. And I'll just stop that we've managed through the lab actually to develop 55 financial instruments and business models, and many of them in Brazil, and they have together mobilized more than $3.2 billion for concrete projects in emerging markets. So be happy to, in maybe the discussion later, share some examples. But again, I'd just like pass back to you, Gustavo, and thank the organizers again very much for having me here today in this conversation.
Thank you, Barbara Buchner. We will get back on the topics that you have discussed, and I will just sum up so we can keep track of the line of the discussion in Portuguese, and shortly I will get back to Henrique Evers to continue the debate. Então, a Bárbara destacou.
Barbara has, well, I'll summarize. She talked about several points, but there are barriers on the side of the cities, but there's also the role and the relevance of development banks in the overcoming of such barriers. I should highlight some points. In terms of the municipalities, there are aspects of tax health. Data is key so that the investments are made trustworthy by investors and in financial institutions that need to report a number of risks. Also on the side of the national system, there's the matters of transparency and the importance of innovative projects to mobilize private capital, the possibility of capturing added value, and some other specific points of several activities that has been developing as the Alliance of Cities, as well as tools of cooperation tools. So I'll give the floor to Henrique Evans from Brazil. Henrique, you have the floor. Thank you, Gustavo. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the invitation to participate in this panel. I'd like to greet my fellow panelists as well. Well, the panel is about cities, but I think it's worth reflecting a little bit about the importance and relevance of cities in the development agenda and the reduction of inequalities in the climatic agenda as well. It might seem like an obvious correlation, but the urban part is sometimes lost in sectorial discussions, and we also lose capacity of scale and impact that we have in working in urban areas. In these urban areas, most of the population in Brazil can be found, as well as the demand for infrastructure. Inequality is concentrated in urban areas, and the climatic impact of climate change is being felt more seriously in the cities. The city dwellers suffering from that. The cities are a very clear expression of these demands, but also they pose a great opportunity in investment at scale to promote this transformation based on infrastructure, but not only infrastructure. One of the major focuses should be the development agenda in Brazil and in most of the countries as well. So these are fundamental points to the climatic agenda as well. And we go through the issues of investment in good quality and low carbon infrastructure. And there's a huge opportunity of subsidized resources directed to climatic investment, and then we have to start thinking about how to join this great opportunity of investment and the demand and opportunity of transforming and changing urban areas. But we need to change this perspective of seeing cities as a subsector or explicit subsector of investment agendas that we have been discussing in the specific sectors, but we should add the urban part. We have also seen in part of data, we worked with GIZ and the Ministry of Mines and Energy, and we talked about the difficulty to map these investments in urban areas because of the lack of clarity of what would be an urban investment indeed. Uh, One other thing regarding the climatic agenda is that we have released at the end of last year a study that shows that 88% of urban emissions, greenhouse effect gases emissions in Brazil, can be reduced with investments in three sectors: transportation, waste, and construction. This gives us an indication of prioritization if we look at mitigation efforts to reduce emissions that cause climate change, and with the opportunity of generating 4.5 million employment positions or jobs until 2030. A recent study being developed by GIZ and CITAL highlights some other sectors uh, of priority. So we have energy, IT, and also urban adaptation. These are priority sectors, not only looking at the climate change agenda, but economic recovery and green recovery. So we have some clues to prioritize the sector. The science Barbara has presented, and my recent study was based on CPI, as I said, showing billions of dollars invested in cities based on the climatic funds, but that could be a lot more. So, summarizing, the need to invest in infrastructure and the money available today is well growing and some opportunities, but it's still insufficient to fill the infrastructure gap. On the other hand, there is this classical story of there is the money, there are not enough good projects. So, cities have their demands and their projects, and sometimes they can be financed. So something is wrong with this methodology. So I can highlight three crucial points to try to change that. One of them is fiscal part, when the tax issue. The other is the agenda of credit operations of the financial institutions. And thirdly, projects, which is one major problem. I'll give you a few examples of how we could solve each one of these points. In the tax issue, we have the part related to urban planning, generation of revenue, and planning of infrastructure, which is very much based on urban planning, but we have to address fiscal reforms or tax reforms at the federal level. The federative pact is crucial in this discussion, and the evaluation platform should also be capable of doing that, but this is also part of the tax framework. And also integrated management with sectoral urban planning. We have an excellent example in the state of Paraná regarding that. Paraná Cidades and Paraná Fomento are institutions that work by integrating these fronts. So these are formats of trying to solve the tax issue. In terms of credit, we have the development financial institutions as key actors, key stakeholders. They are source of resources, but there's a lot that can be improved in terms of method, and there's a lot of asymmetry of information related to that. But there are also matters related to the products being offered that could be better directed to municipalities, consortiums, and cities, and the fostering of triangular relationships. And lastly, there's the matter of the projects. And some colleagues have talked a little bit about that already. But there are a number of initiatives in Brazil in terms of projects to promote the qualification and to improve the design of projects, so the project design. But what we need is to integrate these initiatives so that we can have an impact at the scale we want. We need to discuss which sectors to prioritize, and I believe that there should be a very strong front of capacity building for the improvement of project design. I think I am precisely at the end of my allocated time. Yes, thank you, Henrique. Perfect timing. Just some additional points. Many of the points made by Henrique were discussed by previous speakers, but he talked about this sectorial aspect. Oftentimes, it is supported by sectors and not as a cross-cutting uh, issue. He also addressed the green recovery, stressing what Barbara has put forth as a priority, and the importance of prioritization, also considering this green recovery. And we brought the national and international views, and so we need to bring this now to those who are assessing the projects to and connecting these demands to the international flow. So I'd like to give the floor to Leany Lemos, Director of Operations. Please, and you have the floor. Thank you, Gustavo. Good morning to all of you. Well, good afternoon for those who are in a different time zone. I will bring a little bit about the experience of the BRDE, which is the Regional Development Bank that act in the 3 southern states plus Mato Grosso. This topic of the transition to smart cities, resilient cities, sustainable cities is very relevant to our activity. I'll mention 4 points, some of which were already mentioned. The first is the importance of internalizing in our financial institutions the SDGs. This is the day-to-day work. It's not over, is still to be done. In the case of our institution, we have the strategic planning, which is in line with the SDGs, but it's always a challenge for those who work on the field or in the commercial area. So we have to restate the importance of this topic every day. So we have reformed our lines and programs to make them more in line with the SDGs. We have created renewable energy programs, environmental sustainability programs, including solid waste, also sanitation, water. We have a specific project for energy, social sustainability, also very important programs for the youth, for women, for southern entrepreneurs. We have hired 120 million small entrepreneurs, and this is an internal effort, and this is what guides our credit. Last year we have contracted 4 billion, and 84% of our contracts were in line with at least one SDG. We have developed this taxonomy with the support of FT, and we have developed these classifications. Just so you know, 1 and 4 months ago, there was no gender indicator in our managerial reports. We didn't know how many companies, how many businesses belong to women. So all of that is being incorporated and being reinforced in our work. So the second important point is that we need to work with the private public, and we work at the bank with the public and the private sector. 95% of our portfolio, which is a portfolio of 14 billion, more or less 14 billion. So 95% is with the private sector and 5% public sector. Public sector, we find what was raised by Barbara, Velasquez, and Henrique, some problems regarding tax, payment capacity, lack of fiscal space. We can't do much about that because it depends on the governance of the municipalities, but in terms of projects, the lack of projects, we have helped a lot in that. BRDE works by helping the municipalities in project design as well. So I'll give you a good example of that. With the GIZ, we had a project in the municipality of Porto Alegre in the design of PV projects in schools. So it's being implemented, and it was a partnership not only with international partners but also with our own team in technical assistance. We have been bringing that forth. In the public sector, we have been helping in public lighting, and we help the municipalities to evaluate projects and select processes, and we have been given a lot of support. In terms of the private sector, it has been very important for the institution to internalize the SDG and reform its programs, because this is what we have to present. We can present this to our prospects. So when the financial institutions state, I am a green bank, I'm a sustainable bank, and we want sustainable businesses, and when we communicate that, we can find private projects that are in line with this vision. So we fund a lot of energy cooperatives. So these are private cooperatives in the south. This is one of our strongest programs. 15% of our portfolio goes to energy and sustainable energy. So wind, solar, but especially hydro. So there are small hydroelectric centrals, generators, and working with private audience is one point that we need to take into account. Third point is the challenge of resources. More and more we have less and less resources available. So we are a public bank. We have always operated with public funds, and these resources are being reduced. This is not a priority for the sustainability agenda in the perspective of national resources, especially public funds.
So we've seen less availability of resources. On the other hand, we are working, and yesterday we won the BRDE award for a fundraising project. And so we are resorting to partnerships with multilateral banks, development banks. Of the 4 billion that I mentioned, 1/3 came from international funds, completely aligned with the SDG agenda. And so this challenge is one that all financial agents that work with long-term and local development agendas, and we have been internationalizing as a way to work, not only due to the funds but also the partnerships that are generated, the technical support also to the bank, but also to our clients and customers. Last, I'd like to mention social sustainability. In many events, a lot is said about the urban part, smart grids, technology, perhaps less on social sustainability. But in our country, with all the inequalities we have, and the South is no difference, we also have inequality and differences. To work with social impact is important, and so we created the South Entrepreneurs Agenda and also programs for young people. To mainstream social sustainability has been a focus for the bank. In terms of international fundraising, there is an important agenda with the World Bank, which is fundraising for resilient cities involving infrastructure and allowing for resources for project design, which is one of the bottlenecks that we have identified. I have only 7 minutes, but once again, I'd like to thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Leany, for sharing with us, and very relevant thoughts here at the ABD Forum, and also highlighting 3 points. Going backwards then, the funding. International funding is important for internalization and mainstreaming of SDGs, and so it's all about the egg and the chicken, what comes first. So mainstreaming SDGs in the development of the portfolio of the bank, and in addition, a second point, which is public-private, and also highlighting the importance of communication and position of the financial institution aligned with SDGs, attracting private capital from investments that have the same agenda. So these are the main points, and I'm sure we will go back to this discussion because can see a connection between the different speakers. I'd like to invite our last guest for today because ICLEI was unable to participate, so I'd like to give the floor to the Executive Secretary of the National Front of Mayors, Gilberto. Thank you, Gustavo. It's a pleasure to be with you. Good afternoon, good morning to all of you. Thank you, ABD, for the invitation. First, I'll quickly address cities that are addressing climate changes and that are subject to disasters, more subject to disasters, with heavier rains and droughts and so on, everything that we're seeing. And the good news is that the National Front of Mayors are organizing cities in order to build a permanent agenda of cities that are more vulnerable to these situations. Generally, a lot of focus is given on displaced populations and affected populations, humanitarian actions, donations of food, water, etc. But after the more dramatic situation is over, unfortunately, things go back to the normal cycle until the next disaster. So the National Front of Mayors, because of all the occurrences we had this past summer, and of course we've been monitoring these phenomena for some time, under the leadership of Mayor Francisco Morat and also the mayor of Petrópolis, cities that were strongly affected this year, so that a group of mayors from these cities can process this agenda in terms of making it permanent, an agenda that is not only humanitarian and ad hoc, and therefore we rely on the help of GIZ and other institutions present here so that we can advance in the organization of these cities and construction of this agenda, which is related to the topic of our panel. On the other hand, I'd like to present one more topic which is the difficulties that municipalities might face in the next few months, if not years, in fundraising. Even with good resources and good projects, Brazilian municipalities, and I'm talking about medium and big municipalities, will find it very difficult to achieve credit operations in the future because of the years in 2020, 2021 with the pandemic. We had impediments. We were not able to readjust the salaries of public civil servants in general, and so revenues in 2021 behaved very differently from what was planned in 2020. So revenues in 2021 were 15% higher than what had been planned in 2020. So many municipalities were not able to reach the minimum constitutional threshold of 25% invested in education. ABD knows this agenda very well. Municipalities that do not comply with this constitutional provision are prevented from contracting credit operations, national or international ones, or receiving any voluntary funds. So I like to make a request to ABD members, which are important banks that operate with municipalities. Please help us to approve PEC 13/2021, which is now passing through Congress. It's already been approved by the Senate. It's now being analyzed by the Chamber of Representatives with a special commission already established. PEC 13 states that funds that municipalities did not apply in education in 2020-2021 can be applied in 2022 or 2023. In other words, no money will be removed from education. We need this money, and it ensures the suspension of sanctions due to the exceptionality caused by the pandemic in states and municipalities, and because of the impositions of the pandemic. And so this is a request I'd like to make so that we can all together put pressure for the approval of PEC 13, currently analyzed at Congress. And so these transfers, both national and international, greatly help Brazilian municipalities. Very important for structuring projects, especially at a time when the investment capacity of the federal government is dropping. We've had frequent reports from mayors who go to the ministries trying to negotiate projects, but the response is go to a parliamentarian to try to get an amendment directed, budgetary amendment directed to your municipality. And so the federal investment capacity in Brazil has been captured by parliamentary amendments. And so in parliamentary amendments, there isn't a planning rationale for public investments in any direction, and it depends on specific interests of the office of each parliamentarian. So there are other aspects. I agree with much of what's been said already by my predecessors. Thank you, Gustavo, for moderating this panel, and congratulations to ABD. Thank you, Gilberto. And, well, going back very quickly so that we can maintain our line of discussion. Gilberto from FNP, with the perspective of cities, highlighting that recent floods reinforce the climate crisis, attention and to the SDGs as regards climate changes, short and medium-term perspective on difficulties, specific difficulties of the moment we're going through with the pandemic, basically affecting the constitutional minimum threshold, affecting credit operation capacity of municipalities. Another point related to what Leany said about funding, that there is a limitation of federal resources for investment, requiring ABD members and also cities to adapt to a scenario where the role of international funds is more relevant in the absence of national funding. Before we move to discussions and questions about what's been said thus far, I'd like to show a quick video from Fomento Paraná in the financing of cities. I am Director of Operations of Fomento Paraná. I'd like to congratulate ABD for the initiative of one more forum. It's a pleasure for Fomento Paraná to participate in this debate and contribute to the development of our agenda. Development is in our DNA as an institutional, and for Fomento Paraná, development is more than financing. We don't finance only resources for the municipalities. We finance urban development within the directives of municipal plans. We developed a collaborative, multi-sector and innovative plan focused on improving the Municipal Development Index. This index is monitored by IPARDIS, which is an institute in Pará that delivers indicators of results. And so we created also an interest rate table that is lower, especially for municipalities with, in 2018, we had 29 municipalities with an indicator less than 0.6, 0.6. And so this model works based on the model of, based on 3 entities. Fomento Paraná, with the function of financial agent of this system, with a portfolio of investments of almost 1 billion reais. We maintain coordination and development metrics, weighing them with the SDGs of the 2030 agenda. Urban development to change people's lives, taking resources to the right place with sustainable technical guidelines that are appropriate, constantly proposing better conditions to improve the quality of life of people and reduce economic and social inequalities. This is sustainable development. Thinking now about the video and questions arising from discussion, I'd like to make a proposal for Barbara, Buchner, and Elkin that they both presented a methodology, a structure, a facility for preparation of projects. And I'd like to ask them, how will a project facility meet, or better saying, what care should be given when providing this technical support to municipalities, considering that in Brazil, and we can also think of Latin America, there is a huge variety of sizes and demands depending on location, especially urban planning. And so in order to meet such heterogeneous demand, how can international institutions create a more homogeneous method, as Elkin and Barbara mentioned?
Like support funds and the initial project design. So changing the order, I would like to start with Barbara. If you can react to these points, would very much appreciated. Thank you.
And we want to thank all the colleagues who have very interesting discussions and presentations here. And yeah, I think actually, I think the question could be answered in various ways. Let me maybe just focus on one area where I think that there is a real need for more innovation, where these types of facilities can help. And this is by helping to structure basically financially viable projects that in this way also build the capacity within municipalities, but also within some of the local financial institutions to really, come up with these ideas and really have the right, the tool for assisting cities in how they can address some of the issues around transparency. And let me, again, maybe I didn't have time before, as always, was like talking too much, very briefly just talk about this one example, this incubator, this accelerator, the lab, where again, we do have a specific program in Brazil, actually, where we bring together financial institutions from the public and private sector, including several who have been speaking at this conference here, with the idea to crowdsource, really new innovative business models and financial instruments that can address some of the challenges that I laid out and some of the other speakers. And the idea is really kind of to, come up with, we know that there is a lot of good thinking about specific business models from entrepreneurs or from fund managers who are just not yet, not that, let's say, experienced in the area, so they need more technical support to help structure them, basically turn the concepts that they have into a bankable project. And so what we do with this lab is that we really kind of help define these ideas. We use the investors from the public and private side to basically say which of these ideas are the best ones. It's a competitive process. And then the ones who win, which again could be also like from municipalities, basically receive technical support from our teams that help them turn the concepts, the ideas into real concrete projects on the ground. And we have, so that way you really build the capacity, on the ground, while you also come up with a pipeline of projects that can really help you to address the needs. And maybe I'll just very briefly mention a couple of the city relevant bombs, even though those are not in Brazil, but I think maybe it's just interesting to hear how they could look like. And I think maybe just one, given the time, is around insurance. So it's a climate insurance linked resilient infrastructure financing, which is a concept that wants to drive long-term climate insurance to cities at pre-arranged and at below market rates premium. And it links it to a financial product that would allow municipalities to invest in resilient infrastructure. And that is a project, an idea from the United Nations Capital Development Funds that leads that idea, with a working group of insurance companies, of development finance institutions, investors, climate experts, and insuring firms. And we really think that by developing this instrument, we can help provide the right tools to cities to really then invest more into climate. And maybe let me just stop here, but the point I want to make, we do need very technical support to help structure commercial viable products and projects that really can become a pipeline to invest in, while also creating the capacity on the city level.
Thank you, Bárbara. Elkin, please. Por favor, Elkin, se você puder.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you. The challenge is how to reach scale. So many municipalities, so many projects, so many different situations. So the first reaction is that we cannot use a prescription, the same prescription for everyone. We should have methods and platforms that facilitate solutions that are made to the extent of the problem. Theoretically, it might seem easy. It's not easy. When we have this possibility with new tools that are not dedicated to build capacities all over the world in all of the municipalities in a traditional method or with the same prescription to everyone, but we need platforms of co-creation. We are talking about co-creation platforms that help municipalities to solve planning problems, project design, and which should be articulated and responding to the specificities of the municipalities. So one part of the solution lies with the platforms. Another part, and I'll make a point that was mentioned by Henrique as well, is that there are many sectorial projects, and we need to work in integrated projects, multi-purpose projects that can have impact in different problems at the same time, and that can take advantage of economy of scale and different pieces of projects. For example, there's BRT that's being promoted, and there are other types of problems that are being promoted, but sometimes we have questions: how can we not take advantage of different electric vehicles to make the urban renovation around it, and to support families that live close to the transportation, to improve housing as well. So this integration of projects is great, is necessary, and will have a lot more impact in the objectives of sustainable development, not only in environmental part, but other objectives as well. One other element is a scheme of work for funding which is growing a lot, which is blended finances, which is financing that is combined or blended with complex projects. You need many more components of public and private funding. You need financing for guarantees of the project, funding for structuring, funding for the first and the second part of the project. So there is a whole world, a whole range of possibilities that is quite interesting. So once again, scaling up is a matter of method. The good news is that we already have some platforms that are using all of the advantages of data and data mining, big data, artificial intelligence, and we also have the possibility of establishing a methodology for integrated projects and blended finance, and I believe that there is a positive perspective there. So the work is still, there's however a lot to be done yet. So I have a more specific question for Leany about how to disseminate and to share the experiences in BRDE and lessons learned to other associates and members of the ABDE. If you could list, for example, 2 or 3 strategies that the bank, an institution that is willing to incorporate the SDGs, and what would be a tip to start, and for those who are already incorporating SDGs, how can you develop a pipeline? So if you could share 2 to 3 recommendations, those who are beginning the integration with the SDGs and those who have the SDGs integrated, how can they advance in their portfolios? If I understand your question is, well, there's a previous step of having as the SDGs as the guidelines of the bank. It has to do with the leadership of the institution, and within ABDE we have a very strong support to develop projects internally, and the BRDE started with this agenda 4 to 5 years ago, and till this date I usually say that it's not consolidated yet because it is a project that demands a lot of change. Was Secretary of Planning in training programs, and I did a PPA in 2016. And in line with the SDGs in the Federal District in the Rio Grande do Sul, this is something that, although it's very clear in leadership, it has to go down to the other levels of the organization. First, you need some sponsoring, and you need a leadership that takes this forward. The bank has this very well established, and it has been incorporated into the bank's philosophy, but there is still something to be developed. You talked about the egg and the chicken and how the partners can help. To have international resources that are connected to an agenda, that fact ended up helping a lot in the educational project of institutional change. So I believe that you have to work with planning and to work every day for the promotion of institutional change, and this is an effort that the public sector, the different sectors are willing. Many sectors are willing to incorporate SDGs, but in concrete terms, how does that lie? Well, in our bank, it lies with the credit. So, in the taxonomy, structuring of projects, connection of the funding that we capture, so channeling of the funding as well. And the case of BRDE, the BRDE is a bank composed of 3 states, so there is also an upper guideline. We have our governors that also bring their demands, and we have Director Tomás. Me and him are representatives of the Rio Grande do Sul state. The governor was in copy the conference of the parties. So we are the operational arm, and we are in the front line for the implementation of this agenda. This was our first question, right, about who is starting. So look for support. Don't work alone, and I believe that the ABDE is a good start. So you do have a very strong support to this agenda, as well as the international partners. For those who are already advanced in that, your question would be about funding. So how can you take that leap? Some banks have already taken that leap, and some other institutions are still studying how to do that. First, I think it's a matter of daring, seeking out partners and say that you need help. And this was this history of BRDE, and there's an exchange of knowledge and multilateral development agencies that know that how that operates, and that it can help a lot of institutions. So you're not alone, you can do that, and we and as well as ABDE are available to provide this help. It's also important to have a technical team, a dedicated team. So it seems like something very minor, but it's very good to have a dedicated team of people, even though they don't know how to work with that at first, and but they are fast learners. It's very important having that to institutionalize that, because we leaders we go through our positions, but it's important to have it institutionalized in the different financial organizations. So having a dedicated team to to these projects, a team which is available for that, for learning and exchange of experience, is very important. And to start, it's important to plan, but if you plan too much on how to do this or that, time will go by and you won't do anything. So the agents are there, the resources are there, there is availability of resources and funds, we can see, and this is how we work. We want to do more, we want to raise more funds, but we still lack some of this operational arm to advance, because there are more institutions today that seek us out to make operations than what we can operate in the time we have. So we need to better structure that. In addition to the raising of the funds, all of the management of the funds in our institutions. So the BRDE was used for a long time to work with only one type of funding. So every agent has, every government has their board, their own compliance. So we have 6 partners, maybe 9 to the end of the year. Since our compliance, from our compliance, we need to adapt to other rules, and also our operations need to adapt with internal resolutions, so that our commercial area, when making an operation of public lighting, for example, with resources from the French Development Agency, we have to respect their rules. We have to comply with that. So there are rules from Curitiba, from Porto Alegre and Santa Catarina.
So there's a huge effort, and we use a lot of technology and standardization and platforms in order to simplify this process, but it's a process that is very worthwhile because it internationalizes our institutions, it brings the global agenda to the inside of our institutions and changes the vision, and the impact on the ground is much greater. We are able to take the SDG agenda to municipalities and companies, and it's a movement that converges down the road. Thank you. We're very close to concluding here, but I want to bring up one more theme that can link the two discussions. So very briefly, to Gilberto and Henrique, some of the points addressed. So providing technical assistance at the international level, different initiatives, CPI and UN Habitat are associated. They highlighted that in order to address this diversity of cities and specific demands, it is essential to have training in association with technical assistance and joint cooperation, always working together with municipalities. It's not support that comes in, comes out, leaving a lot of reports. And so it's training for preparation of projects with an anchor of continuity. Also, technology highlighted as a key tool to ensure scaling up, both at the level of platforms and planning and technical preparation. And I will have to conclude, but as a teaser and also an invitation for Henrique and Gilberto, a panel that will come out of this discussion on the 4th of April. This is the question that I wanted to ask them. How, well, thinking of economic green recovery, how can we mobilize more resources considering the challenges that were presented by the pandemic? So to what extent can this be overcome together with the different players that are trying to make a difference, advancing with the SDG agenda? But this will have to be left for a next event, an upcoming event. You're all invited. 4th and 5th of April. It will be a pleasure to have you with us. Henrique, Gilberto will continue this discussion in the future. Thank you to all you all. Congratulations, ABD, for the excellent event. Thank you, panelists.